Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Dialogue for Change, supporting veterans in the workplace. If you have questions for our panelists throughout the event, please type them in the chat box. Invariant's Dialogue for Change series facilitates conversations on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for companies and members of the policy community interested in engaging on relevant cultural business issues. I'm Monica Matouche. I work with Invariant's defense and national security clients to help tell their stories in the media and among key stakeholders. I began my career in the United States Air Force, serving more than 21 years as a public affairs officer. Before Invariant, I was the communications director for the House Armed Services Committee. I've also held many roles at the Pentagon, most recently as senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. There's no questioning the importance of recognizing former military personnel on Veterans Day, but making the workplace more veteran-friendly year-round should also be a priority. Today, we'll explore the benefits of hiring veterans, the skills veterans bring to the workplace, and how to attract and retain veterans, and how both leaders and employees can better support and understand this important group of people. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our four guest speakers who are experts in veterans issues and hiring. First, Mike Hadley is Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Guard Association of the United States. After completing 23 years in the Army and Army National Guard, Mike worked as a consultant within the defense industry, assisting companies with marketing, business development, and strategy planning, primarily with the aerospace industry. During his Army career, Mike served a myriad of command and staff assignments in aviation, strategic planning, and legislative affairs. Next, we have Kellen Hollinger. He's the legislative director for the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of the United States. In this role, he focuses on legislation that advocates for national security and readiness of the enlisted members of the National Guard. Kevin served 22 plus years in the Army and Army National Guard and completed multiple combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Allison Jaslow is an Iraq war veteran, a dedicated public servant, and Chief Executive Officer of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Nationally, Allison is recognized as a leading voice on the impact of military-civilian divide on our political system and as an authority on the unique challenges faced by women in the military. A former Army captain, Allison is also a seasoned political and communication strategist, serving on the staff of several members of Congress as a White House communications aide. Rounding out our bunch, Matt Pincus is Senior Manager of Public Policy at Workday. In this role, Matt leads Workday government relations efforts supporting public sector business enablement on federal procurement, IT modernization, workforce deployment policy. Matt was previously Director of Government Affairs at the National Association of State Chief Information Officers and Deputy Legislative Director at the National Guard Association of the United States. He also served as a military legislative assistant for Congressman John Carney of Delaware, handling national security, foreign affairs, and veterans policy issues. So let's start the discussion by talking about why it's important for companies to include veterans in their talent pipeline and workforce. Allison, when people think about the skills veterans bring to the civilian workforce, they also often default to things like teamwork and work ethic, which are undoubtedly true, but what other skills do veterans bring to the workplace that are sometimes overlooked?
You know, when I think about sort of unique assets, and this wouldn't apply to all veterans, but, you know, if you've been a combat veteran like myself, and you've literally had to be calm under fire, you can learn how to be a pretty good, like, crisis manager. So, you know, I would say that an asset that I've been able to bring to my career is being able to do that. You just mentioned my background in politics. And then I also think that, like, one of the reasons why we can stay calm in crisis is, you know, when I would go do a convoy in Iraq, like, the convoy mission itself is part of the execution, but planning is the most important thing that you do, and the rehearsals that you do before you go out the wire. And so I think something else I've also tried, and my staff laughs at me because I do this, but it's like actually going through the rehearsals before you go through the event. Because once you've thought through all of the courses of action that happen, all of the how you're going to respond to a bomb on the side of the road, you know, or fill in the blank X other thing that can happen out in the private sector or the real world back here at home, the better you can actually navigate those crises. And so for me, at least, that's just a good example of something that I feel like I've been able to bring from my time in service that was also included combat deployments into the workplace that has really served me well.
Kevin, do you think that there are industries or roles where veterans tend to excel, and why do you think that is?
Yes, I definitely think there are industries and job roles that veterans tend to excel in. These industries often align with the experience and the kind of education they get while they're in service, and these veterans develop. Some of them are, other government agencies, security clearance jobs, law enforcement drivers, healthcare, teaching and education, transportation, computers, and financial services. I think in addition to these, I think veterans are often going to excel in positions just based on the discipline that they receive, and just the reliability that they have to excel in the military often makes them great employees outside of the military and into their civilian careers.
So what do you guys think about their leadership potential? Do you think that lends itself to specific industries, or does that play a role in what kind of jobs they should be looking for?
Well, I definitely think it does. So I think the key to success when becoming a leader is always being able to follow first. So if that's the very first thing we're going to teach any service member. And I don't want to exclude anybody. So it doesn't matter if you're in basic training or in your basic officer leader course. That's the essential portion of that course, is to be a follower. And you can only be a great leader after you've become a great follower. So I think all of us start out as just phenomenal followers, and through one method of education or another. We used to talk about it when I was a drill sergeant. I was going to do one of two things with you. I was either going to make you the smartest person in the world or the strongest person in the world, and that was 100% on you. But I think just based on their ability to follow is what tends to lead them into those leadership roles.
Mike, what do you think are some common misconceptions about hiring veterans, and how can companies address them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Monica, and thanks for asking. I think one of the things that I've seen a number of times is this, what I'm going to call kind of a Hollywood effect, and putting out some negative stereotypes, quite frankly, with regard to veterans. Everybody's kind of seen them and seen different characters played, somebody that's very robotic, very rigid or unstable. And it's almost embarrassing to talk about it because it is so far from the truth in reality. And I think that employers are usually very pleasantly surprised when they have veterans in there and see that they're just like everybody else, but with a lot of the other positive attributes that some of the other panelists have already alluded to.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for that, Mike. I think I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about how companies can bring more veterans into the workforce. Allison, you're up. Veterans are often underemployed, meaning they're pushed towards low-skill jobs despite their skills and experience. Why do you think this happened, and how should corporate America help?
There's some great research that some researchers who are part of the Duke Veterans Duke Veterans Transition Lab that have done around this, that unfortunately we view veterans as people who are built to self-sacrifice. And so because we view them, and some of us view ourselves as that, they're naturally being drawn towards either, professions that maybe wouldn't have the most earning potential, but also more service-oriented professions. And it's not just the veterans who themselves are being drawn towards that, but also society sort of pushing them in that direction. So I think what we need to do is actually do some really active mentorship to show veterans that they belong in the C-suite as well. And to help them see the path between, where they took off the uniform and maybe got their GI Bill into corporate America, which, thanks to the GI Bill, could make a generational difference in some of our veterans' lives. We invested in them with the GI Bill, and then if they can climb the corporate ladder, what their future and their kids' future looks like can look very different than many of our veterans' paths and like where they grew up. But it's got to be an active problem solving, I believe.
Did someone say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on this one real quick,
Absolutely,
because
Matt.
I think one of the biggest things that we need to combat is just it's poor evaluations of while we're in service. And I think that's what gets us. And going back and kind of caveating on what Mike said, where it's a Hollywood kind of theme on that. They see us as a one-dimensional kind of person. Like, I was an Army Ranger, so obviously I can do nothing more than go fast, kick doors. Mike was a pilot, and so he could only fly a Black Hawk. Mike had a various amount of jobs and had to transition often. I've had different types of leadership jobs that I had to do. And look, I come out and I'm an attorney at a military association, about as far away from where you can be as an infantry service member. So I think versatility is our key to moving forward. And I think that's the one thing that we need to start with, is reevaluating and kind of publicizing what each one of us actually goes through in our military career and how that makes us marketable on the outside.
What's very interesting is, even though I'm a public affairs officer and communications translates easily to the civilian force, I struggled at the very beginning because a lot of people didn't understand that as a communication officer in the military, how can you communicate about a specific industry? And I had to say, every 2 years, I rotated to a different airframe or a different Air Force mission. And so I can talk about food, I can talk about IT, I can talk about anything. I can message just about anything. So I fully understand the potential of understanding what you do and how to reevaluate that for the civilian workforce. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'd just like to add one other thing to that as well, Monica, and that is that I think that, one of the things we see quite often is we're frequently asked to do things that might be outside of the scope of what our particular skill set may have trained us for, whether it's additional duties, a particular task or project that's going on. And we change jobs a lot too, whether it's having to pick up locations and go different places. So there's a high degree of versatility and adaptability that you have to have in order to be successful in the military. So I think that's something else that employers need to keep in mind on how adaptive and sometimes creative that military members have had to be in order to be successful throughout their careers.
Matt, that's a perfect segue to you. From the Workday perspective, what are the challenges you see for service members making that transition from their military careers to civilian jobs? And how can companies help alleviate some of those challenges?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I just want to say that, I am very appreciative and grateful to be on this panel with you and Mike and Allison and Kevin, a very esteemed group. But so at Workday, we really start from the premise that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And that's certainly true with our veteran population. I think Allison, Kevin, and Mike clearly have covered that. And with about 200,000 service members transitioning every single year, I think companies, including Workday, have a real serious responsibility and role to play to ensure that veterans have every opportunity to have that meaningful career following their service to the country, right? And sort of what Mike and Kevin were just touching on, like, how do you ensure that veterans do not get pigeonholed into something, into a siloed job, which they may not even want to do, right? Kevin was talking about this. But so one of the main challenges that we hear at Workday from, our veteran employees, and I remember hearing about it when I worked on the Hill, I remember hearing about it when I worked with Mike at Naugus, is that once a service member decides to make that transition, how do they go about finding meaningful employment? How do they not get pigeonholed? How do they know what jobs they're qualified for and what skills they need? And how do they determine what companies fit their cultures and values? And like everyone, pretty much this process starts with the resume, right? Creation of the resume. In the civilian world, I think there's like a pretty widespread consensus that building or updating a resume is albeit an annoying, but a pretty straightforward process. But for transitioning veterans, that process is challenging, right? Like, how do you take, you know, these skills and your experience that you had in the military and translate it into a document that makes you marketable, right? And I think, you know, it's why companies of all sizes, including Workday, you know, hire special military recruiters to reach down into the population and sort of, you know, serve as that in-between role. But so at Workday, we kind of took this a step further. And so for the past 2 years, we've had a project led by veterans at our company to take the guesswork out of resume building. And essentially what we're doing is within the next few months, we're hoping to release a military skills translator as a feature of the Workday platform. This is not a commercial message for Workday. I think it's just one sort of alternative that we're sort of figuring out, and we're getting feedback from our veterans community. And so about a quarter of the jobs of all jobs in the US are hosted on Workday. So that gives us pretty tremendous insight into the US labor market, right? And so it also gives us insight into the skills that are required for those jobs. So using publicly available data, we know with pretty, you know, granular accuracy, the skills that are required for someone, say, coming out of the Army as a logistician, right, would likely have. So the military skills translator will allow that Army logistician to simply enter their branch of service and rank and see what suggested skills they may have, which then gives them increased deployment opportunities and a greater match for open positions with any company, not just Workday. The other thing that I do want to talk about, you know, very quickly is creating a culture where veterans feel valued and an integral part of the business. Whether it's something that the three, Allison, Mike, and Kevin touched on. We have what's called a Veterans Employee Belonging Council. Every other company has something similar, but you know, what we've done is, you know, our Veterans EBC has, you know, changed our military leave policies, right? We have tons of members at Workday who are in the reserve component. So creating military friendly policies. So I think, you know, taking the guesswork out of the job application process and then sort of making sure that, you know, your internal policies are supportive of veterans and current serving members of the reserve components.
I really appreciate that. Mike, what qualities do you think what qualities in a workplace do veterans look for when deciding when to work somewhere? Matt brought up a really good point about the military leave policy and people who need to take military specific leave, but what benefits are attractive for veterans and their families?
Sure. So I mean, I think there's a number of things there to kind of talk about. First of all, I think that one of the things that attracts people to companies or other places of employment is, you know, they want to be challenged. I mean, I think by and large, most of our veterans have come from challenging environments, challenging, you know, job and skill sets that they've had, and they kind of get a little bit addicted to that in terms of those challenges and don't want to do something ordinary or mundane. So I think that, you know, those things are attractive. I also think that, you know, some of the, you know, the culture of the organization they're joining is important, and that they want to feel like they're contributing to that, and it's a good positive environment. One of the other things too that I would talk about, I mean, I think Matt brought up a great point with regard to the flexibility, particularly for our folks that are our veterans that are either currently serving in the Guard and Reserve or looking to go into that. I think that's an important point. But the other thing too, that just, you know, is I just wanted to touch real quickly on healthcare. Healthcare is a big one, right? But I think that most, you know, veterans come from already experiencing quality healthcare when they're during their time in service, both for them and their families, and so that they're accustomed to that. They know what it means to them, and so I think that that's something that's going to be important. And we know that there's a lot of gaps out there. Our association is continuing to work on that and trying to help find ways to provide healthcare particularly for the Guard and Reserve community that might not have it, and also, you know, there's a beneficial. You know, it's very beneficial for employers as well. So we're looking at ways to do that. And you know, it could go on for a couple hours with regard to that, but I'm not, in the interest of brevity, I'm not going to do that today. But anyway, I hope that kind of answers some of the things that, you know, we're trying to get at.
Absolutely. When we're looking at people in the workforce and getting talent, one of the things I want to ask Allison, building on what Matt said about talent is everywhere and opportunity is not. Allison, you've really talked about women veterans and what they deserve for their service and how they're sometimes overlooked. As a first woman CEO in your organization, in your experience, how can companies better recruit and retain women veterans?
Sure. First, actually, let me just piggyback off of Mike's question really quickly. Just because I feel like it can't be stated enough that, like, you know, I like wanted to be in the Army from when I was 13. I actually thought that what was all I was going to do in life. Life had other plans for me, but like not everybody joins the Army for the reason that I joined the Army. In fact, most of my soldiers joined the Army because they wanted good pay, 4 square meal or 3 square meals, you know, good. Mike touched on benefits for themselves and like their family. And it's that simple when it comes to companies. Like if you're paying them a good, decent wage that can help them provide for their family and good benefits, and for many service members, stability that maybe they never had growing up, I think that just goes a long way. It's really as basic as that. You know, when it comes to women veterans, especially for companies that are specifically trying to recruit veterans, make sure that your recruiters are going out looking for people like myself and Monica, in addition to people who look like Kevin and Mike. You know, I think one of the great privileges of leading Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America now is like I'm now a very public woman veteran, and I can, as we'd like to say, I can help change the way America sees its veterans by virtue of my leadership position. But that bias exists. And so I would make sure that like your recruiters are hunting for the Monicas of the world and the Allisons of the world as much as they are the Mikes and the Kevins of the world. Or that they have their, to use Army speak, they have their head on a swivel looking for folks who look like us too. Because it really has to be trained in your people. And if you're not training, you know, your recruiters to see basically veterans as, we're not a monolith. We look like the rest of America. But I think when people close their eyes, their image and their brain is not readily Allison or Monica. And so just coaching your folks to make sure that they are looking for women vets as much as any other vets. And I think that I think women vets will really impress you as employees too. Because women who are especially successful in the military, as Monica has been, you really have some soft skills that are hard to match out there in the real world. So.
Well, thank you, Allison. I always say, if you're going to run a hustle, run a good one. And so,
Yes.
And so
For
you
sure.
need that in the civilian world as well, too.
Totally.
Kevin, how can you encourage greater collaboration between government organizations, nonprofits, and the private sector to support veteran employment and make opportunities more readily available?
Well, I think there's several ways that we can kind of collaborate between government agencies, non-for-profits, and the private sector. I think creating joint programs and initiatives between government agencies and us and the non-for-profit, providing financial incentives. One thing that we work on day in and day out, along with Naugus downstairs, or well, like not everybody knows they're downstairs from us. We're actually upstairs from them. Let's rephrase that. Not only that, we work on a tax incentive for employers to kind of encourage them and try to help break some of that monotony of how reservists actually work. Develop training programs just to help people understand that you know how things kind of work, and provide mentorship and support elements. I think there are already a great deal of examples of this. I think the VA is a huge partner of not only non-for-profits but private sector jobs, and they offer a variety of different programs to help collaboration. Recently, I think the Department of Labor has done amazing things in there. In fact, the Assistant Secretary, James Rodriguez, we're going to give him a little bit of a props on this one, as he is a first sergeant, although he's from the Marine Corps. We'll let him go. He is an enlisted person, so we are going to give him a little props. But he's done amazing things where he's brought all of us in We've talked from things on how reservists actually enter the workforce to he educates USERA, he educates on a lot of different topics. And then even SBA has tons of programs out there that kind of help collaborate between all of us.
Before we go on to our last topic, I want to make sure that the viewers know, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box and we'll answer them as we go along. So same for the group. If you guys want to talk over one another, jump in anywhere. So the last topic we have is supporting veterans in the workplace. Matt, what do you think are some successful strategies that organizations have implemented to create a more inclusive and supportive work environment for veterans?
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit earlier Workday's Veterans Employee Belonging Council, which I should mention. I know Mike will appreciate this, and Kevin is led by a guy named Wayne Ormond, who was with the Utah National Guard for about 27 years. And so Wayne and the Veterans EBC developed a career accelerator program at Workday. We call it CAP. And this program focuses on veterans and provides them with, it's a formal program that provides them with a 4-month paid program and then training to launch their civilian careers. And we give them the option to stay with Workday on a full-time basis. And so about 80% of all the veterans who've gone through this CAP program are full-time employees now at Workday. So I think it's it's not only that job training, it's formalized mentorship program with someone who probably went through the same headaches during that transition that you did it, recently. And so we're also in the process of creating a military and veterans alliance program. We have 10,000 plus customers across the country or across the world, right? Everyone has these same challenges and everyone wants to hire veterans. So, how do we expand our network and provide career counseling, networking, mentorship, training, and then job opportunities? Again, this is not, this is my perspective from Workday. A lot of companies are trying to tackle this problem. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But again, how do you create those opportunities? How do you allow someone who's transitioning to say, well, maybe I'd like to become a program manager. Maybe I'd like to learn coding. I don't necessarily want to stay at Workday. I want to go find employment elsewhere, but let me see if this works. So I think that Career Accelerator program is a really good sort of apprenticeship program that allows them to figure out, is this the right direction or wrong direction for me?
It sounds really similar to the DoD SkillBridge program or Hiring Our Heroes. And one of the things I found when I was at retirement eligible is no one really knew about it. It was a flyer on a desk and it was word of mouth. Like, hey, this guy that sits next to me was in the program. Do you know anything about it? So the fact that you are building up a similar program is actually really excellent.
And talking to folks at SkillBridge and talking to Hiring Our Heroes, work with them, pretty closely. So, we're also of the position, like there's a lot of things out there that are working well. How can we add to that? Right. You don't need to recreate the wheel when it comes to this, but you just need to do it better.
Monica, if I may,
Absolutely.
Matt had mentioned something earlier that kind of made me think about something else. I just wanted to mention, especially with regard to Guard and Reserve, veterans and that are currently serving. One of the things that another challenge out there, I think that is it for both for the individual and for the employers, that they're still serving and still have military obligations. And a lot of times we've seen where sometimes employers, may be hesitant to hire somebody because they know that they have Guard or Reserve background. Or anyway, the point I wanted to make is that, yeah, they've got military duties and so forth, but it is very, very predictable for the most part. They know those schedules and what those drill periods are going to look like, when those special training events or when deployments are going to occur, and can give that information, well in advance for employers. So, and they're very good about finding ways to work around it and how to make it all work. We've got, literally hundreds of thousands of Guard and Reservists out there that do it every day. So just don't shy away from that.
I think there's other things, just kind of caveat what Mike said. I think USERA protection is probably one of the most important and valuable assets that a service member has, especially coming out of the Guard and Reserve. I think that protection needs to constantly be looked at, and that protection needs to be strengthened more and more. I think that might be one of the most valuable assets we have.
Thank you for that. A unique group is military spouses. Matt, how do you think companies can support military spouses and the unique needs of this particular group?
Yeah, look, I think we all recognize that really, unfortunately, military spouses are a significantly underemployed and unemployed, group of people. I'm trying to remember the most recent stat. I think said something like a fifth of all military spouses are unemployed. It's not surprising. I mean, I know Naugus has advocated for military spouses. Angus has as well. I'm assuming IAVA has. So everyone's sort of in this together. Congress has introduced numerous bills. There's been a few different apprenticeship programs. And military spouses certainly have, unique challenges in that they're often forced to move around the country and the world with their partner, which makes finding gainful employment, really difficult. Hiring our heroes, worked with Congress on last year's NDAA, and to focus on this internship and certification program just for military spouses. And employers need to be flexible. And given the widespread ability for remote work these days, I think that's a positive for military spouses. So implementing common sense policies. We just did this in July when we updated, we call it our relocation policy. That includes now, for the first time ever, specific language that supports military spouses that are forced to relocate. So, this gives them, seamless relocation, allows them to continue doing their job wherever they are in the country or the world, and to even work fully remote. So I think employers need to recognize that, and that 1/5 of military spouses being unemployed, that has to change. But I am sort of heartened, and I'd be interested to hear the other panelists' view. Like, I feel like this is something that's getting more attention. And that's a good thing. And so the focus is on it. And now it's just, how do you formalize and create programs to incentivize and help them get job opportunities?
I think twice over the last year, I've testified about USERRA protection for spouses. I think that's a really good first step. I know, I think I realized it later after I had retired, and I took a more active role in the day-to-day life that happened inside our house. But man, without my spouse, I couldn't make the things happen day in and day out that I do at my with my family. From at youth athletics to schools to even lunches are very difficult. And the fact that we in the Reserve and National Guard especially take people away from their families in the middle of the night to handle natural disasters, to handle civil unrest, and to handle overseas deployments, and we're leaving a spouse at home with zero protection. And I think a lot of times their only choice is to resign. Whereas I do believe they need that opportunity to just take a little step back and figure out how they're going to make life happen for the next month, 3 months, 6 months, or a year, while their other half is or on active service. And we've heard naysayers that have said that wives or spouses did not sign a contract. I wholeheartedly disagree. And I think every spouse out there in one way or the other has signed a contract. We can refer to it as I do. That puts you in a very particular position. And I do believe that spouses every day serve alongside their actively serving members. And it cannot happen. Day-to-day life, day-to-day service cannot happen without them. So we have to offer them the same protection we do the service member.
As a military spouse whose husband just returned from a 2-year assignment to Des Moines, Iowa, I fully support you. Allison, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I want to make sure what's not lost here is just sort of the matter of principle. Like, you cannot both say you support our troops and not also support military spouses. they are one and the same. And I think when it comes to employers, Matt got at this a little bit, but transferability is key. Lowe's just rolled out a huge initiative to support military spouses. And if they can take that job with them from duty station to duty station, that's going to go a long way to you supporting military spouses and having them in your workforce. And I think that's just what you have to think about first and foremost, is whether you're going to have like either remote options, and or if your company is large enough, if they can leave one Lowe's location and plug into another one at Fort Huachuca after they've left Fort Hood, like that's going to be important for them. But yeah, the matter of principle is the one that I don't want to get lost on everyone.
Absolutely, Allison. For the group, how can diversity and inclusion initiatives be extended to encompass the unique needs and experiences of veterans employees? Allison, did you want to start?
Yeah, I just think, as with everything, cultural competency is key, and that's in part just so you have more familiarity with our population, but also, listen, I'm just going to name it here. I think some people are probably afraid of hiring like that crazy vet, right? And that one of the reasons why we're a protected class is for that reason. But that's not, certainly not all of us. And so to the extent that employers, as a part of their D&I initiatives, can slow the team down, slow especially recruiters down, and get them to know us a little better and get more familiarity with us, I think it will go a long way. And I'm not sure that we're always top on the list when those types of initiatives are taking place inside corporations big and small.
I can't help but say it. A lot of times it seems like these conversations turn into that we're somehow broken, or a large population is broken. We serve because we're desolate and hungry. And I don't think any of that can be farther from the truth. In the wide variety of circumstances, veterans or reserve and active duty, or reservists and National Guardsmen, that we don't need any special benefits whatsoever. And I think the disabled vet that needs it is just the same lines as the guy that was riding down his tractor, fell off, and cut his leg off. It's very rare. We're not a broken population. Over 400,000 National Guardsmen today are dual headed. They're actively serving their country, and they're going to work every day. The one thing they all have in common is they're a professional at something else prior to being in the military. And they're not serving because they're broken, desolate, or they need food, or they need this. Most of the enlisted service members out there that are E4 and below make under $150 a month. So I promise you, they're not paying any mortgages or anything else out of their military service. And I personally have never, ever served with anybody that did it for the money. I think we all do it for the patriotism and for the camaraderie that we get out of wearing green every day. So I think that's the one thing that we all have to remember is veteran doesn't mean broke. Veteran, to me, means highly motivated, highly educated, and willing to do what it takes to be successful and to take care of their families, just like they did every single day for the last 360 years that the National Guard has been around.
Absolutely. Did anyone have anything to add to that? That doesn't mean that veterans come with some baggage sometimes. I'll pose this to the group. How can employers and peers support the mental and emotional well-being of veterans while in the workplace?
If you'd even just think about like what's happening in the world right now today, but thinking even further back to, let's call it the Afghanistan withdrawal, when major news events are happening like that really hit close to home for our community, the understanding and making those connections, I think, is really important. There are probably companies who have had no idea that they had an Afghanistan war veteran who was staying up spending sleepless nights because their interpreter was now fearing for their lives in Afghanistan after the withdrawal. But I guarantee you that there were vets in the workplace who were suffering in silence like that, or maybe had a supportive spouse at home. And I think understanding sort of like the direct connection between our lived experience in the military and what's happening in the news sometimes, I think, and checking in on folks, and or like having a peer-to-peer, if you've got enough vets in your workplace, having a peer-to-peer sort of, we call them battle buddies in the Army, but to check in on folks and foster a culture where they can support each other, at least, I think is very, very important, because there are going to be the things that you don't know, but land very differently on our community, like they would any other community.
Yeah, I think Allison brings up a really good point in terms of just kind of, I think that most veterans are probably a little bit more attentive to current events and watching, and they understand how some of these events that Allison talked about, could have real impact to not only themselves, but definitely to people that they know for sure, because they still, I guarantee that almost anybody who's recently departed still has a lot of friends or other, or possibly family. I myself have, 2 of my kids are still currently serving. So I've, every time something pops up on the news feed, I'm paying attention, because we all know that, there's going to come a time where, that we're going to get called out to go do something, or somebody that we're close to is going to get called to do. So things like that. And I think that sometimes the general population might not be as sensitive to that, or certainly not as sensitive to that, and may sometimes have conversation or make flippant, comments about what it means or not. But, we know there's a reality associated with doing that. So just things to keep in mind, I think, just to kind of be aware of.
To add on to that, I think some of this is incumbent on companies to have veterans or members of the reserve component, in positions of leadership at a company, right? That not only facilitates the culture, but it allows for that sort of, prevents that lack of understanding, right? And really, fosters the ability for folks to understand sort of the implication of, what's happening in Israel and Gaza, right? And like how that could have an impact. What, Allison touched on the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And look, I'm a civilian. I've only worked in this world, but, I think if you don't have the right leadership in place, then a lot of that, could be an issue. So it's really giving opportunities to people who served or are currently serving, in your company to direct those conversations.
I think a lot of it needs to be peer to peer as well. Educating peers is probably one of the most important things we can do. I think all of us have dealt with, have you shot anybody? Thank you for your service. Those types of questions that we really don't know how to answer. I tell close friends of mine all the time that have you shot anybody is a question that you don't want me to answer. You might think you do, but you really don't want me to answer that question. And thank you for your service. I have no idea what to say. Mike and I had the same exact question or conversation yesterday, where Mike is a lot more experienced than I am and still doesn't know what to say about it. So I think just educating people peer to peer on what kind of signs to look for, what kind of things that kind of hit home to us and are sensitive to us. And as far as what kind of signs to look for as suicide is on its way up, we gotta be able to identify that.
I agree. Creating a safe space, whether it's peer-to-peer or with other veterans, is very important to the longevity of veterans in the workplace. Do we have any questions from the audience? It does not appear that way. You guys did such a great job. But the one question I do want to ask that I didn't ask Mike earlier is, how can employers assist veterans in finding the right career path and job opportunities. I know Matt talked about it a lot with Workday, but from your perspective, what are folks looking for and how can they do better?
You know, I think the big thing for employers is, is open lines of communication. And it really kind of gets back to that. And I think it's difficult sometimes to translate some of your military skills onto a resume. In fact, I was just helping a friend of mine who's separating from military service and entering into the job workplace. I can read his resume. I know exactly what he's done and what it means and stuff, but I can tell that I know from experience that an employer might not do that. So I think that you got to talk to them. Also, I think that, sometimes employers want to try to think that, this guy, did a particular job in the military, and that's what he's going to do here for me. He might be looking for, or he or she may be looking for something completely different and want those new challenges. But, it gets back to what I originally said. The only way you're going to know that is to talk about it, communicate. But I think a lot of folks really want to try to explore new things, and that might be the reason that they may have separated from the military in a lot of cases. So, for employers, be a little bit, ask questions on those resumes when you're doing those interviews. Also, I know there's a lot of good resume services out there, and I would encourage veterans to really take advantage of those. And, that's writing those resumes is hard, particularly when you have not had to write a resume largely throughout your military career. And so this is probably a lot of times for veterans, maybe the first time that they've ever had to sit down and actually write out a resume and kind of try to make those things that they want to stand out on a resume and translate that well into a civilian skill set or something that might be attractive, for employers.
Absolutely.
I did see a question pop up, and it talked about SkillBridge.
Mhm.
SkillBridge is a great program that has came about over the last few years, and I think they continuously expand it, and it's great. I think Mike's talking even further in depth than SkillBridge though. So I think sometimes we're limited on SkillBridge, especially in the reserve and guard, where we're not necessarily right down the block from an active duty base where they offer it. I do understand they do offer some programs online, but not all of them. You're not going to learn to be a welder on the internet. You're not going to learn to be, some of those things over the internet. So I don't think that that's the answer to everything. Like, well, we gave you one thing, I gave you one brown t-shirt. Do you really need two? I think we continually get better, but that doesn't mean we're perfect.
And I think to Mike's point, just because you are a welder in the military doesn't mean that you want to be a welder on the outside. And so finding ways to align your interests with your skills can be challenging. And I think there needs to be a way for employers to be helpful, and whether or not that's a network of people that are doing the same things and offer their support. But Kevin talked about it earlier as a mentorship program. We have a question from the audience.
I did want to bring one. I'm sorry. I did want to bring one more thing up. Like Mike said something about welders. You brought it back up. A lot of times, just because, and I think this is an utter waste of money, that we do need to focus on getting civilian skills transferred over that individuals get while they're in the service. If you're a welder, some of these guys that are high pressure welders weld $100 million submarines and keep thousands of people safe under the water. These guys are phenomenal at their job. Not good, they're the best. But yet when they come right out of the Navy, they can't get a job welding because they don't have the proper certificates. So now they're looking for money to pay for this schooling that they shouldn't have to do anyways. And it's the same thing with carpenters, mechanics, drivers. Doesn't matter what you are. We need to focus on civilian transition by giving them the training they need to be successful on the outside. One day you're going to leave.
The training and certification piece is a really big one. I remember there was a program with the White House where they're looking for more CDL drivers, but there wasn't a transferability of their military driving capability and their training that they've already gone through and how to get a CDL. So a lot of people just wouldn't.
They've started that actually.
Awesome.
So a couple of years ago, they do have a program that allows you to kind of get rid of the driving test portion of it with proof from your commander that you actually drove vehicles in the military, you still have to take the written test. I still think that that's a great first step, but you know, we still got a long race ahead.
Absolutely. How can work colleagues be most supportive to veteran coworkers and managers? I'll pose that for the group.
You should buy them lunch every day, all veterans. Mike, you know where a veteran is.
I'll come find you for lunch.
Yep.
I would say from my perspective, it would be helpful if ask the questions that you have. It's more important to me if you ask the questions rather than wonder. And to Kevin's point earlier is some questions don't really make a whole lot of sense. You may not actually want to know the answer, but if you want to know the answer and you genuinely care about what their military experience looked like, what it does, and how it lends itself to your current role, then simply ask the question. Involve them in the conversations.
Yeah, I the other thing too is I think that, you know, again, I'll kind of refer back to one of the things I said earlier with regard to kind of the Hollywood effect and stereotypes and stuff. And people are going to come off, sometimes you get questions and they think that they're experts, or, you know, they've seen a particular movie or something, and they're going to tell you all about what you did in the military. And a lot of that could not be farther from the truth, or, you know, or anyway, I think just kind of keep those things in mind, you know, like you said, ask questions. You know, it's fine to ask questions and talk about it, but you probably don't know as much about the military as what somebody that came out of the military did. I don't care how many books or how many movies you've seen, you would not know as much about the military. So don't try to correct them and tell them how things are.
I would say from a Hollywood perspective, that falls under public affairs. Most of their uniforms are incorrect.
Right.
Most of them are out of order. So, and they do that so that they're not accused of impersonating a military member. So there you go. We have another question. Plain Sense is looking to create a program through DoD. Is that realistic? Should they go through an established SkillBridge program, company or program?
We're going through, we're having conversations with SkillBridge right now, trying to figure out, you know, how to do more with them. So my advice is to set up a conversation, talk to them what you guys are trying to do, and see if there is, you know, synergy there. But I look, I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of good programs out there, right? And so, you know, look at what's working, look at what's established, and try and be additive to that. My own personal view.
It doesn't look like we have any questions, so we're probably going to wrap here. We've come to the end of our Dialogue for Change. Thank you for your attendance, and a special thank you to each of our panelists for today's discussion. But thank you for bearing with me, of all people. Please look for follow-up emails from Invariant for more details about the Dialogue for Change speaker series and for additional diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging resources. You can also find us on Twitter at Invariant and on LinkedIn. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.